Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. Thank you all for watching, subscribing and liking it. With us, our dear friend and lawyer, Nick Bajaj. How you doing, my friend?
I'm good. Thank you for having me back.
Welcome back, man.
Appreciate it.
Rough topic today.
Yeah, rough topic.
Rough topic. We'll be talking about tenancy agreements, tenants' behavior, and a little bit about the law, what is going on with from the landlord's aspect and the tenant's aspect. So, welcome, man.
Yeah, thank you again for having me.
Pleasure.
This is a pretty popular topic these days, and a lot of people don't know what route to go when it comes to their tenants. We're seeing a lot of tenants cause issues with their landlords, and we're seeing a lot of backlog with the LTB. And everybody seems to be giving a different answer on what's going on. So I'm here to hopefully clear the air and give my opinion on what's happening, and go from there.
Can you explain what LTB stands for?
So it's the Landlord Tenant Board of Ontario. Right now, they've been seeing a significant backlog in cases with landlords and tenants. Being a lawyer and seeing closings also get affected by this, where tenants have refused to leave the premises because either they've been issued the wrong notice or they refuse to leave because they're taking advantage of the backlog in the system right now.
So when we have a listing and then we have a tenant, right? So this is what you're talking about. There could be issues could arise before closing where tenants do not want to leave.
Correct. So I'll give you the most...
What is the right way of pursuing that or acting in that manner? So
the most recent situation that kind of answers your question is we had a client who was selling his property in Waterloo, and he didn't provide vacant possession. So he served an eviction notice on his tenant. He did it the right way. Essentially, the new buyers were coming in and moving into the property. And a week before closing, the tenants refused to leave. They said, "We're not leaving, please give us cash to leave." So this is a popular term used by tenants and landlords called cash for keys.
Cash for keys, there you go.
So they requested $15,000 to leave the premises. And when we asked them where they were coming up with the cost, they said that these are our moving costs. We have to look for a new property because rents have gone up. So our client had substantial profit on the property he was selling, so he had no choice. Otherwise, he would have been sued by the new buyer. So he had to pay the tenants $15,000 to vacate the premises.
So basically, he just ripped it off like a band-aid and said, "Okay, I don't have any more problems. Let me pay that amount and let me deal with it in that manner, right?"
And in this specific scenario, you would want to get something called, I believe, an N11 signed. So normally, what people do is they just hand over cash to their tenant. So if your tenant takes cash and you have no proof that they've been given cash to terminate this lease, then you're going to have to go back to the LTB. But if you get an N11 signed, a notice to end the tenancy, then you're protected, much more protected than you would be if you're just handing over a blank check or cash to get the tenant out.
Yeah, because if the relationship is already starting negative, if they're asking you for money, or if they're poking you in a different way, like you want to make sure you're protecting yourself properly.
Exactly.
So I'm sure you do know, but I'll ask you anyways. Any horror stories or channel, like from your channels or from your sphere or from your experience that you heard or might have seen that it was not easy or possible for the landlord to kick them out or end tenancy lease?
So unfortunately, there are many stories, especially in today's world. So we've seen tenants refuse to pay for months at a time. We've had landlords not be paid for a year. We had one specific individual who couldn't afford to pay his rent because his investment property was his income source, and his tenant stopped paying, so he basically had to leave his current lease in place because he had to start paying his mortgage for his investment property. That was one incident, but there's multiple. There's a lot of people who haven't been paid for a year and a half because the LTV is backed up anywhere from 6 to 8 months. Now, some people say they've seen situations where it's been backed up for a year.
So what happens? Okay, so 6 to 8 months, the tenant continues to pursue the non-payment law in their head. So what happens? Like they don't pay, you wait.
Yeah.
You're waiting for the judge to make a decision. What usually happens?
So
do you know on average?
If the tenant stops paying rent, you would have to serve something called an N4, a notice to end the tenancy for non-payment of rent.
Got it.
So you have to wait for a hearing, which can take months. Let's say hypothetically 6 to 8 months. After that hearing, they have to make a decision, and that decision can take a week or two. So you're basically at a standstill until you figure out the decision that they come back with. So in that time, the tenant doesn't have to pay rent. I mean, legally they're supposed to, but there's so many scenarios where they're not paying rent for long periods of time.
So does it matter if it's under agreement of purchase or sale, APS, through like a 1 year usually is the agreement?
Yeah.
Or do the scenario changes when that agreement expires and it continues month to month? Or it really doesn't matter? Like it could happen in the month 3 under a contract regardless, and they can stop paying, and then you're again backlogged with all the administration and everything else. Yeah. So it really doesn't matter.
So at the end of the day, it negatively impacts tenants and landlords. A lot of people think it just affects landlords, and it does significantly impact landlords because financially they're paying for the insurance, they're paying their mortgage. If the tenant stops paying utilities, they have to pay the utilities, so their overhead increases, and a lot of landlords, that's their livelihood, that's their retirement, that's their investment.
Absolutely.
So, but there's also an adverse effect on tenants because let's say tenants are living in a very dangerous situation. They have to go to the LTB to basically dispute their landlord. So they're also being affected by it as well. And landlords might take advantage of that in that specific scenario. So not only does it negatively impact landlords because they're facing a financial burden, it affects tenants because they may be living in a situation that's hazardous, dangerous, and something that's in contravention of their lease. So there's two sides of the coin at the end of the day, and that's what a lot of people don't see. But I think that if you understand that concept, it'll push maybe the LTV to get a little bit better. And I think they're pushing towards hiring more adjudicators to make the process more streamlined.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's a fun question now. If the tenant is not paying you, so you have the permission not to pay the bank the mortgage, right? Like they put a stop on it. No, it was a joke.
Yeah. The bank's still going to expect their payment.
Exactly.
Unfortunately.
Regardless.
And there are tenants that will take advantage in certain situations, knowing that you have these expenses, and tenants tend to do that frequently with more than one landlord, and that's why it's important to get credit checks done. It's important to get job references, like a letter of reference, obviously get IDs of the tenants, and if you want to Google them, check out their social media, just to kind of make sure that the tenant that's coming into your property is not going to take advantage of you.
So, and I'm finding from that aspect, we have, past clients, current clients, they're trying to rent on their own, they're trying to do all kinds of stuff, and so be it. I mean, it's their property, it's free will, do whatever you like. But I'm finding that once you deal with a realtor, and that realtor goes through these steps,
correct,
the likelihood of it happen is significantly less at that point.
Correct.
Because there's a third party involved, and that third party is taking care of these steps. And if they're talking to the fourth party, the buyer, lease agent, or whatever you want to call that person. So there's too many people involved, and I feel that sometimes these tenants, they're like, you know what I mean? Like they try not to go that route, like, you know what I mean? So I'm finding that in my case.
And I think that's why it's important to get a realtor when you're looking for a property or to lease out your own property, because they'll actually vet the tenant, right? They'll actually do it. And a lot of people, they'll put up ads on Kijiji or Facebook, and there's nothing wrong with that.
No.
But if you're doing that, you're definitely posing a risk to yourself.
Absolutely.
Where you're going to get a tenant who's going to take advantage of you. Whereas if you get a realtor involved, they'll do the credit check for you. They'll get a reference.
Much more involved.
Exactly. They'll do their due diligence. And at the end of the day, what is it really? 1 month's rent, whatever the commission is. You have that solace that you have a good tenant in your property.
It's worth it.
Yeah, because we're not playing we're not playing with water bottles or pennies. We're playing with properties.
Absolutely.
So,
I would agree. Is there a difference between our province of is there a difference between our province of Ontario and other provinces within Canada when it comes to this particular topic?
So being involved in the New Brunswick market as well, I'm a real estate agent in New Brunswick. For those of you that don't know, I help people acquire multi-residential properties in the East Coast. We've never really had too many issues with tenants because the laws are, I wouldn't say favored towards landlords. I would say that there's an equilibrium, that if tenants do something wrong, like stop paying rent or start destroying your property, where the rentalsman in New Brunswick will favor the landlord over the tenant. So tenants really don't take advantage of landlords in New Brunswick, vice versa, landlords don't take advantage of tenants. It's an equilibrium at the end of the day. Whereas in Ontario, you're seeing a little bit...
So it's a fair game at that point, right?
Correct. I mean, whereas in Ontario, you're seeing the scale kind of tip towards more of the tenant, and I think tenants should have rights. They deserve to have rights.
Absolutely,
because they're paying rent, but landlords are also stuck at a standstill where they're waiting months at a time to get a decision when they have huge expenses imposed on them.
Yeah, especially in Toronto area and GTA and stuff like that, with all these ridiculous prices, right? And stuff like that, right? So and we see throughout the province of Ontario, right? Like even having a positive cash flow nowadays, it's next to impossible almost. Like, you know what I mean? Comparing to some other parts of Canada, like you just mentioned, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, maybe, and stuff like that. Like they're like it's different. And despite all of that, you might definitely positive cash flow on most of these problems, and then you have a peace of mind, and then like, you know what I mean? Like it just doesn't make any sense, right? So can you tell me a story, if you know, about someone trying to move in their property and not be able to, and then sleeping in where was he sleeping? In his car? So
there was an individual who was featured in a newspaper article, and he, to the best of my understanding, he had an investment property, and his tenant stopped paying the rent for his investment property, and he was renting another property, similar to the situation that I gave before. And since his tenant stopped paying for their rent, he couldn't afford to pay his overhead expenses, mortgage, his insurance, etc. So he had to actually sleep in his car. I can't remember for how long, but he had to stay in his car because he couldn't afford to pay his rent.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, so
that is ridiculous.
So it's difficult for most Canadians or people living in Ontario to have to pay a mortgage and also rent on top of that, because this is him trying to build his retirement plan, right? And buying this investment property, and he's renting because he's relying on the cash flow of this property that he's invested in.
The guy took the risk, right? I mean, took the risk. He bought the property. He's doing all of that stuff, and now he has to sleep in his car in front of the building, right? Like or wherever, right? So interesting. Is there anything else you would like to add? I mean, like when it comes to
my advice to realtors is, if you're looking to sell a property, try to ensure that you get vacant possession. Ensure that you serve the appropriate notices on your tenants. Be candid, be polite with your tenants. At the end of the day, they're also trying to build financial wealth, but they're just renting in the interim. A lot of people have the goal of eventually buying a property. If you go the right routes, if you go with applicable laws, then things will usually turn out smoothly. But if you can get vacant possession before you list a property, it avoids the headaches of having to deal with a tenant that may not move, refuse to move, and cause a headache for all parties involved, the buyer, the seller, the lawyers, obviously. So to ensure a smooth transaction, it's better to get vacant possession before you list a property. That's probably my best advice.
Well said. Well, I hope all of you got something out of this. And I'm sure, listen, continue buying, continue investing. We're not suggesting you're definitely stopping. There are a lot of good tenants out there, but like Nick said, just build that relationship, and hopefully everything works out well. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nick.
Appreciate it.